This is one of those games that tends to get skipped over when people talk about the series. It doesn't come up as often as the big numbered titles, and it isn't usually the first thing mentioned when people talk about survival horror coming back, or action going too far, or the series finding its footing again. It kind of sits off to the side. And that's weird, because it brings back characters that the series had just left behind. Characters who never really got the spotlight they deserved. It puts them in a world that feels closed in and just dark, and lets the experience play out from there.
Are you sure you don't need me, Barry? I mean, Dad.
I'll always need you. But for now, I have this.
But what was Resident Evil Revelations 2?
Pedro?
See how his bracelet changes to the color of fear.
By the time this game was coming together, the series was in a really interesting spot. Resident Evil 6 had just come out, and came out pretty strong. But then things started to slow down with it. Capcom talked about it pretty openly afterwards. The sales just kind of leveled off. They said it just completely plateaued. And going into that release, expectations were really high, and what followed it didn't quite stretch as far as they'd hoped. A lot of that ties back to how Resident Evil 6 was positioned. Capcom aimed really wide with it, a big audience, massive presentation. The design leaned into scale and constant motion. Reviews spent a lot of time talking about set pieces and cinematic moments, and how much was always happening on screen. That part of the identity was front and center with that game. But after that, you could feel something shift. Something changed in the tone around the series and how people talked about it, and what Capcom seemed interested in responding to. There was room opening up for something more contained, something that didn't need to carry the weight of being the next big Resident Evil. That's where Revelations 2 starts to kind of make sense. One of the first big clues with that is how it was released. Revelations 2 came out in 4 episodes. You could buy them separately week by week or just pay for the full season. The full disc version came later, but early on the episodic rollout was the experience, and the team really leaned into that idea. They talked about it like a TV series, episodes built to pause at the end, moments designed to sit with you a bit before the next episode came out.
You okay?
Moira. She's dead.
What?
Reviews noticed that rhythm, and the developers paid attention to how people responded to it. The structure shaped the pacing and how information was handed out, and it shaped how tension had time to sit with you between each episode. That format really lines up with how the game was being made.
Who are you?
I am the Overseer.
Please, send help.
Revelations 2 was built with a smaller budget than the mainline games. The director was asked directly about keeping the scope close to the larger games while working inside tighter production limits. The way he talked about it focused on working deliberately. More platforms, different versions, a team that knew Resident Evil well and built around what they could support cleanly. And once you start looking at it that way, that approach shows up everywhere in this. The game spends more time holding you in place, the camera stays close to you, spaces feel tighter. The experience stays focused on who you're with, rather than how far it can stretch, and that feeds directly into the characters the game centers on, because this brings back Claire Redfield and Barry Burton. That choice came from fan feedback. The producers even talked about it openly. People wanted to see these characters again, they wanted to know where they ended up. That shaped the structure really early before everything else locked in.
Stay back.
Claire and Barry are treated like people you stay with. The story sets between RE5 and RE6 in the timeline, which gives it a clear place without asking it to carry a major turning point for the series. It gets to exist in that gap. That space allows for smaller moments, more personal pressure, and it's just a slower build-up. The development team also talked about working with familiar foundations and updating them for how people play now. Resource management still plays a role here, decisions still carry weight, and the systems are adjusted to modern expectations, but the core ideas are still there. The focus in this stays on survival fundamentals and moment-to-moment tension. When all that comes together, Revelations 2 looks like a very intentional project. It gave Resident Evil room to kind of pull in on itself, to slow down a little bit, to work with tighter boundaries and spend time with characters and situations without needing to announce itself as a major shift. The episodic structure, the scope, the cast, the way it's all framed, all of it points in the same direction. This was a Resident Evil built to narrow its focus. Once you settle into the game some, you'll start to notice that the island starts carrying most of the weight. Claire and Moira wake up inside a prison. There's no real context. They're just surrounded by concrete and metal in these tight spaces that feel used. Later on, Barry arrives looking for him, moving through the same places with a different purpose. But the island itself never changes. It's the constant. Everything happens inside it. All the areas reinforce that. Prisons, labs, these wooden paths, older buildings that look like they've been repurposed more than maintained. All the rooms feel functional in a way that's kind of uncomfortable. You get the sense that these places were built to hold people and just process them and move them along. Moving through it feels like passing through something that's already active. Pretty early, the idea of being watched starts to hit you. Cameras are set up around the island. The wristbands Claire and Moira wake up wearing react to fear. Someone's tracking that, commenting on it and adjusting things around you based on what they see. The island starts feeling organized around observation. That awareness really stays with you. Even in the slower sections, there's this sense that your presence has registered somewhere. That what you're doing matters to someone you can't see. The island feels structured around containment, around monitoring and control.
Could be useful.
That carries straight into the enemies you run into. A lot of them look like the result of experimentation. Bodies changed, parts stitched together, shapes that don't feel accidental. Some of them move like they're still figuring out how their bodies are supposed to work at all. The Revenants especially give off that vibe. They are these humanoid forms that just look like they were stitched together. There's a strong body horror vibe running through it. The kind that focuses on flesh being reshaped and repurposed. For me personally, it reminded me a lot of Clive Barker's work. That fixation on physical suffering becoming part of the environment itself. Some of the visuals even drift into Event Horizon, where it feels like you're moving through the aftermath of something that went too far and just never came back. Alex, the antagonist, is really tied to that feeling. Her presence on the island and what she's been involved in makes it feel like this place exists for a purpose. The experiments, the fixation on fear, the need to observe people breaking down. It all feels embedded into the location rather than just layered on top of it. That weight and feeling shows up the most in Claire's sections. I mean, it reminded me a lot of Saw. There's some straight up torture themes here. People being tested, fear treated like data, and the environments reflect that. You're walking through places that hold evidence of what's already been done, that gives the game a rough, uncomfortable edge that sits with you while you play. And the island keeps holding on to that pressure. Even during the slower stretches, when you're solving puzzles or moving carefully through a space, the feeling doesn't lift. The lighting stays constantly dim, the paths stay tight. Even the woods feel boxed in. Everything just feels worn down, monitored, and discarded. The island feels like it's been running long before you arrived. That's where the tension comes from in this game. You're stepping into something that's already had momentum, something that's been watching, testing, and reshaping people for a while. You can feel that history in the walls. You're just the next ones moving through it.
Fire! There, shoot!
Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far into the video, seriously, thank you for hanging out with me for a little bit. It really does mean a lot that you all stick around with me in these big videos. If you haven't already, consider subbing to the channel. There's a lot of content already on there and a lot more coming. Leaving a like and a comment also helps a lot too. I'd love to hear what y'all thought about Revelations 2. Whether you were excited to see Claire and Barry come back, or if you didn't like the game, I'd still like to know why. For anyone watching on mobile, there's also the hype button. It's only there for the first 7 days of the video's life, but it's a way that you can directly help grow the video and push it deeper into the algorithm. And if it's gone by the time you see this, a like still goes a long way. And for anyone new to the channel, or maybe you just didn't know, I do stream these games on Wednesday nights and Friday nights. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone who supported those streams with super chats. I really can't thank you all enough for that. And then the last thing, big shout out to all the channel members as well. It really blows my mind that people want to do that. But I'm going to be adjusting those tiers here soon, so we'll have some better stuff going on for you all in that. But that's enough of all that. Let's get back into Revelations 2 and how it actually plays, because this one's doing some really interesting things compared to some of the other games. One of the most important things Revelations 2 does is split survival in half. You're never playing as a complete character on your own. Every section pairs you up with someone else, and those pairs are built to feel uneven by design. One person can handle direct combat, the other can't. Instead, they support in smaller, more specific ways. With Claire and Moira, that split shows up immediately. Claire carries the weapons, she's the one actually dealing damage. Moira's role sits alongside that. She can stun enemies with her flashlight, she can interact with certain objects, and she's the one helping you read the environment. You end up switching back and forth to get through the areas safely. Barry and Natalia work the same way, just with a different emotional texture. Barry handles combat, Natalia doesn't fight at all. What she brings is perception. She senses enemies before you see them. She points out threats that aren't obvious yet. She helps you move through areas with information instead of firepower. What matters here isn't the actual individual abilities for these characters, it's the relationship they create. You're always operating with gaps, you always feel like something is missing when you're controlling one character. That missing piece is sitting right next to you, and the game constantly asks you to acknowledge that. You switch because you need to, you rely on the other character because there isn't another option. Capcom even talked about this openly back during development. The partner system wasn't built around efficiency or a power fantasy, it was built around dependence, around making sure no single character could carry the experience on their own. That choice really shapes how everything feels. You can't ever rush ahead confidently because you're responsible for two people. You have to be careful when you engage with enemies, because one of the characters can't defend themselves the same way. You move through rooms with an awareness that survival is shared, uneven, and fragile. Even when you're technically with someone, the game never lets you forget that you're incomplete on your own. And that's the pressure Revelations 2 keeps leaning into. You're not meant to feel capable by yourself, you're meant to feel functional together. That dependence feeds straight into how combat feels. Ammo stays pretty tight the whole way through. Even when things are going okay, you're still keeping track of what you're spending and what you might need later. Every encounter has that little calculation running in the background while you're moving and reacting. Enemies are built to hold their ground. They soak up hits, they push back, they create situations where stepping forward too fast gets you clipped, grabbed, or shoved out of position. Fights tend to stretch just long enough to settle into your nerves. So the rhythm shifts naturally. You reposition a lot, you adjust mid-fight, you work angles, you let enemies move into space instead of charging straight at them. You lean on whatever advantage you can make in the moment. Spacing, timing, your partner's position. Combat turns into managing an exchange rather than clearing a space cleanly. That feeling carries across the entire game. A lot of people picked up on that when it released. The combat keeps you alert, your attention active. It keeps you responding to what's happening instead of setting the pace yourself. And because survival is already shared, every fight carries extra weight. You're tracking where your partner is, you're thinking about how close the enemies are to getting them. You're making decisions with the understanding that one mistake ripples. Combat becomes part of the pressure the game is always applying. You come out of fights feeling like you got through something, like you held things together long enough to move on. That pressure carries into how you interact with the environment too. A lot of exploration in Revelations 2 takes time. Lockpicking is a big part of that. You'll come across these locked chests that feel just slightly out of reach. And opening them isn't instant. It asks you to stop, to commit a few seconds, to stay in place while the world keeps moving around you. And this can get really tense sometimes. Those moments are really important. You're usually low on resources when you find them. Ammo's tight, healing items aren't overflowing. So every locked chest turns into a decision. Do you take the time now and knowing you're exposed, or do you move on and leave whatever's inside it untouched? The game gives those interactions weight by slowing everything down. You're focused on the lock, on the timing, on getting it open cleanly, and while you're doing that, you're aware of the space around you, footsteps, sounds, of the possibility that something could wander in while your attention is split. That turns scavenging into part of the tension instead of a break from it, because you're actually pausing inside these rooms instead of just sweeping through them and grabbing supplies. You're standing still, giving the environment a chance to press back. Even optional exploration feels like something you earn by staying calm long enough to finish what you started. Over time, that shapes how you move through the island. You start reading the levels differently. You take stock of where you are before you stop. You listen more closely. You think about escape routes even while you're focused on something small like a lock. Exploration becomes another place where the game asks for patience and awareness.
That's where she is.
Let's look for a way down.
Scanning fits into that same rhythm. It's essentially the same mechanic from Revelations 1. It's something you do slowly, on purpose. You stop for a second, you look around, you let the space show you what's there instead of just rushing past it. You start catching small details that would be easy to miss otherwise. Items tucked into corners, objects that blend into the environment. Little hints that a room still has something worth finding if you just give it a moment. That starts shaping how you move through the levels. You walk more, you take your time with the camera, you pause at doorways and corners and let the scan pass over the space. Exploration turns into a careful read instead of just a quick pass-through. That pacing does a lot of work here. While you're scanning, you're standing still, your attention is on the environment, and there's always that low awareness sitting underneath it, listening for a moment, watching for anything that might interrupt you. After a while, scanning just becomes part of how you play. You move through rooms with a different mindset, you look for patterns, you check spaces twice, you treat environments like they're holding information as much as supplies. It lines up with everything else the game's doing. Progress comes from paying attention, and paying attention takes your time. That same measured pace shows up in how weapons improve. Upgrades are there, but they come in small steps. You find parts while you're exploring or inside the locked chests. You use workbenches when you come across them. You nudge things forward a little at a time. A bit more damage, a faster reload, a slightly larger magazine. Those changes matter, but they don't flip a switch or anything. You feel the difference over time instead of all at once. A weapon starts behaving more reliably, reloads feel a touch smoother, shots land with a bit more power. It's the kind of progress you notice after a few encounters, not the moment you install it. Because of that, upgrades fold into the same mindset as everything else. You're still counting ammo, you're still choosing your fights, you're still thinking about positioning and timing. The tools get a little better, but the pressure never really lets up. The game keeps asking you to stay careful, even as your equipment slowly improves. That pacing was huge for me. It keeps progression grounded. You're building familiarity with your weapons instead of chasing the next big jump. Every upgrade feels earned through time spent scavenging, surviving, and holding things together just long enough to move forward. And there's one more layer running underneath all this once you start jumping between characters. Things Claire and Moira do early on don't just stay in their part of the game. Doors they open, systems they bring online, paths they clear out. That work stays done. Months later, when you step in as Barry, those changes are still sitting there. You feel it right away when you revisit a place Claire and Moira's been. A gate's already open, power's running through an area that used to be dead. A route exists because someone else pushed through it earlier. There's this quiet continuity connecting people who never actually cross paths. That starts shifting how progress feels, because you start thinking about what you're leaving behind for somebody else, what you're setting up. Small actions start carrying a little more weight once you realize they'll matter later. It feeds back into the shared survival idea the game keeps building. Claire and Moira move through the island doing what they can, and Barry benefits from that work down the line. Even with months between them, they're still part of the same chain of effort. The island remembers what's been done to it. By the time you circle back through the spaces, survival feels like something layered, built by different people at different times, piece by piece.
Wait. This is Moira's.
Hello? Bobby, it's me. I think this is the end. I wanted to tell you I love you. Very. Daddy. I'm sorry, I was the bad daughter.
No. You're not the bad one.
Barry.
The story in Revelations 2 starts with Claire Redfield. By this point, Claire's been around long enough to know how the world works. She's seen outbreaks, cover-ups, the way things get cleaned up and quietly buried. She's working with TerraSave now, which is basically focused on what happens after all that. Helping survivors, documenting damage, trying to keep these incidents from disappearing into reports. That's what puts her in the wrong place at the wrong time. Claire, Moira, Burton, and the rest of their TerraSave group are grabbed during a public event and wake up on a remote island. Locked down, separated, wearing these strange bracelets. There's cameras everywhere, a voice talking to them like they're part of a process that's already started. Moira's right there with her. She's Barry Burton's daughter, and she brings a lot with her in this situation. She's really smart, she notices things, but she's deeply affected by fear, especially around violence and guns. And the game never lets you forget that. It shapes how she moves and reacts, how she survives alongside Claire. She isn't here to overpower anyone or fight back, really. She's literally just here to try to get through it without falling apart.
You must be so scared. I know I am. My name's Moira. See? We're like sisters. Everything's okay now. What's your friend's name?
It doesn't take long to realize the island has a purpose. Everyone there has been infected with something called the T-Phobos virus. It reacts directly to fear. When stress spikes, when panic sets in, the virus responds. That's why the bracelets matter. They're tracking emotional responses in real time, feeding that data back to whoever's running the show. person is Alex Wesker, Wesker's sister. Alex sits behind the island like a presence rather than a constant threat. She watches, comments, she nudges situations in directions meant to provoke reactions. The island is her experiment. People move through it as subjects. Fear, identity, collapse, all of it gets observed and cataloged as it happens.
It shouldn't be like this. I wasn't afraid as I watched my hair turn gray and the flesh sag from my bones.
Claire and Moira spend their time navigating abandoned prisons, industrial areas, and labs that feel like they've already served their purpose. They run into other TerraSave members along the way: Neil, Pedro, Gabriel. Everyone responds differently once the pressure starts setting in.
His bracelet changes to the color of fear.
There! I've got you!
It means he's not the one.
Some try to hold it together. Some start making bad choices. Neil's path especially shows how fear and control start feeding into each other once things begin slipping. Then the timeline jumps. 6 months later, Barry arrives on the island after picking up Claire's distress call. He's older now, carrying more loss, moving with the kind of weight that never really leaves him. No one sent him, it's not an official mission or anything. He's there because his daughter might still be alive. Barry teams up with Natalia Corda. She's a little girl who's been through the island's experiments in her own way. Natalia senses danger before it shows up. She feels the threats rather than actually seeing them outright. That ability connects straight back to everything the island revolves around: fear, awareness, and perception. As things keep playing out, Alex's goals become a bit more clear. She's pushing people towards breaking points and watching what survives afterward. The experiments revolve around identity under pressure, how fear reshapes people, how far someone can be pushed before they become something else. In the darker outcomes, that obsession goes even further, hinting at Alex attempting to preserve herself by transferring her consciousness into Natalia.
Wesker! Oh, no, you didn't.
I understand how you felt now, Albert. It's not enough to live. I want to transcend.
Across both timelines, the characters spend most of their time responding rather than directing. They adjust, adapt, they endure what's already been set in motion. TerraSave never swoops in to fix anything. The BSAA doesn't arrive to take control. The island stays sealed.
Are you sure you don't need me, Barry? I mean, Dad.
I'll always need you. But for now, I have this.
That's the thread running through the whole story. Everyone is being watched, everyone's being measured, and every realization just exposes how much of the process was already in place before they arrived. The story frames vulnerability above everything else. Survival happens inside a system that treats fear like data and people like variables. And the longer you're there, the clearer it becomes that knowledge doesn't protect you, it just makes you easier to see. When Revelations 2 came out, the response landed somewhere kind of in the middle. Most reviews were pretty positive, just not glowing. People talked a lot about the story and the characters, especially seeing Claire and Barry back in the mix. The partner system came up a lot too, mostly in how it shaped the moment-to-moment tension. Smaller encounters, more awareness of who you're with, less of that constant forward momentum. The episodic structure helped keep things moving, even if not everyone knew exactly how they felt about it at first. At the same time, the rough spots were easy to notice. The visuals already felt a little bit dated when it launched. Animations could look a little stiff, certain areas started to feel familiar in ways that really stood out. Those points were in the conversation right away, and they never really left it. Players were split in a similar way. Some people clicked with it almost immediately. They liked the pacing, the way resources stayed tight, the atmosphere, the way the game asked you to slow down, pay attention, and manage situations instead of rushing through them. For people who missed that survival horror rhythm, Revelations 2 felt like something they hadn't had in a while. Other people finished it and walked away feeling fine about it. Solid experience, nothing that stuck with them long term though. The episodic release didn't land for everyone. Some people had trouble connecting with the structure, and others felt the presentation didn't leave a strong enough impression to carry it forward in their memory. That divide never really went away. What changed over time was how often the game came up. It didn't outright disappear, but it also didn't dominate conversations. Instead, it started showing up in side discussions. Threads about underrated Resident Evil games, videos revisiting entries people skipped, people talking about moments or characters that lingered longer than they expected. Revelations 2 picked up a quiet reputation.
I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
It stopped being framed as a major statement of the series and started being talked about as an interesting choice, a small entry, a character-focused one. A game that leaned into tension and restraint instead of scale. That's where it fits in the franchise. It sits between eras, after the full push into action and before the series fully committed to its modern direction. The scope stays tighter, the focus stays on people instead of spectacle. Pressure comes from the environment, limited resources, and shared survival rather than constant escalation. Even people who didn't love everything about it noticed that. There was this general feeling that at its core, it understood something about Resident Evil's identity. The slower pace, the emphasis on reaction, the sense of being under-equipped and watched. That's where its legacy settles. Revelations 2 didn't redefine the series. It wasn't trying to. It didn't swing the franchise in a new direction overnight. What it did do, though, was show that a smaller, more inward-focused Resident Evil could still work. That tension could come from pacing and vulnerability, and character relationships could carry weight without needing everything to be louder or bigger. So now it lives in that in-between space. It's not really forgotten or held up as a pillar, but it's remembered by people who resonated with it.
Who's the master of unlocking now, huh? Come on, hurry.
That's why it still matters. Revelations 2 makes room for a kind of Resident Evil that values pressure over spectacle, shared survival over dominance, and atmosphere over scale. And that space it occupies, it still feels pretty empty.
You all right?
That's going to do it for this one. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. Y'all are the real MVPs. It really does mean a lot that you all stick through the whole thing. But if you enjoyed this one, and you haven't already, consider subbing to the channel. There's a ton of content already like this, and a lot more coming. We're going through every Resident Evil in the series, and then we'll be working on 9 when it comes out. Things are starting to pick up in a really cool way for the channel. I've had some companies and developers to reach out recently, so there are some bigger projects and collaborations coming down the line that I'm really excited about. But if you want to help the video out, a like, a comment, or sharing it around goes a long way. Let me know what you thought about Revelations 2, or where it sits for you in the series. I always like reading those.
Oh, excuse me. Hey, Polly, you see my jacket over there?
But, as always, I'll see y'all later.
A cage went in search of a bird, but now the bird is gone. The bird has changed.